All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Again, I'm Brenda Moore, and you know me as a consultant and a coach and a contractor. And I love to equip ministry leaders with philanthropy's best practices. It's my great joy. Welcome back. If this is your second session of Legacy Giving, the basics, and this time the focus is on education. The education step of the 6 steps in the Legacy Giving program. I'm so glad that you came back, and the very fact that you did come back says a lot to me about how significant your commitment is to this work and to the ministries that you lead and serve, and I really want to honor you for that because it's an important commitment. If this is your first time with us and you haven't watched the first session on leadership, then I just want to encourage you to either start there or go back as soon as you've taken in this session. Session 1 sets the table for everything that we're going to talk about today, and I hope that context will be helpful to you. Just a couple of logistics before we get started. I'm sorry I have you on mute because I want to have a recording that has got enough quality to share with others. But as you are working through the session tonight, if you have questions, go ahead and put them on the chat roll, and I promise we'll have more time than we had before at the end for you to ask your questions, but feel free to cue those up in the chat roll as you have them, and we'll get to them. And tonight, first things first, we're going to start with a word. We're going to start by reminding ourselves why we really care about this education step anyway, and why we care about legacy giving in the first place. If this were simply about raising planned gifts, then you might find other resources for your learning, but legacy giving at its heart is about passing on the faith to the next generation. And Psalm 145 is one of those reminders to us that it's not only our duty, but our joy to see to it that the next generation learns about God. And God intends that each generation will teach the next generation to read Scripture and trust and obey and rejoice in the confidence of God's love for them. I particularly like Psalm 145 while we're on this education theme, because it doesn't just say one generation shall teach your works to another. It says one generation shall praise your works to another. And it's about praising and worshiping God in the process of teaching. So if you've come to learn more about legacy giving, thinking, this stuff is pretty dry, then you've missed the why. Psalm 145 shows us the why and the way our generation shall praise the works of God to another. And we'll do that through our worship and our teaching and especially our relationships with the young people in our lives. We'll do it through our acts of love and service and generosity, and we'll also do it by passing along our God-given resources into our churches and ministries that will be there to walk alongside the next generation, and those organizations will be praising God through their work. So this is why we are here. This is what moves us to care and to act. So let's start with a word of prayer, and then we'll be off to the races. Lord God, we do praise you for your mighty acts throughout all of history and through each of our lives. And we are so grateful for the generations of saints before us who praised your works to us. Be here in our learning so that we're equipped in every way you would have us go to praise your works to the next generations. Amen. All right, let's jump in. Here's our agenda for the next 40 to 45 minutes together. We're going to do a quick review of legacy giving and the framework and the keys to establishing an effective program so that, again, we can continue to see how all the pieces fit. And then we'll get into some specific steps and some tools related to education. We'll zero in on two specific audiences tonight: your legacy giving leaders, you, and your prospective legacy givers. And then I'll wrap up with a couple of recommendations for your very next moves so you feel like you can move forward right away. And then along the way, I'll introduce you to just a few of the downloadable resources that are a part of the toolkit for all of this. This happens to be one of those steps where I do have a lot of resources to share. And I haven't included all of them in the presentation tonight. I will include them on the website tomorrow when this tape or this recording is also available. And you'll be able to use them. But we'll look at some of the primary ones tonight. So a quick review, a quick reconnection about legacy giving. Oh, excuse me, Danae, thank you. You are asking me an important question. You are not seeing my presentation. Hold on. Oh, good grief. Here we go. All right, looks like I get to re-record this. That's all right. Here we go. Let's do it this way. Now you can tell me if you see a shared screen. Okay. There we go. Thank you. I told you I was just learning how this, I'm still learning how this all works. So just to review what I just whizzed by here, here's what we had. There's our first page. Here's Psalm 145. Oh, thank you for being so patient with me. Here's our agenda. And now we're on the 6 steps of legacy giving. All right. So let's put the education piece into context. Oh, I laugh at myself. Again, just a reminder that I've worked on this curriculum because for the past 3 decades, I've seen and experienced a lot of struggles with plan giving. I've worked with too many ministries that just don't know where to start or how to get started, or maybe they do get started and then they stall. And most often they stall when it comes to securing gifts for the fund. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. That's the next session. So after years of using all of these plan giving best practices, some of which I learned from some of you who are here tonight, I've developed this program so I can hopefully shorten your learning curve. I've tried to synthesize and simplify what I've learned, and I've collected and refined a bunch of resources and some tools so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You know that I use this word legacy as an acronym to create this framework for these 6 keys to legacy giving. And in a nutshell, these 6 basic components focus on leadership, education, which is today's focus, gifts, which we'll talk about next time. And then the 4th key, administration, is about policies and processes. The 5th key, communication, that's helping you develop a year-round plan for promoting your program. And then at the end, we'll talk more specifically about you. Again, I know that some of you have already been doing really great work at pieces of this, but even if you feel like you've got some of this, I hope you'll stay with me and watch for the pieces that might be missing from your plan giving program, or the pieces that you could improve. Let's cover one other thing that we looked at last time, but I'd like to revisit it with you. And look at these 3 jars. You'll particularly like the one on the far right that's filled to overflowing. That's the jar that represents the charitable income from bequests. that colleges and universities receive. They receive more than 20% of their total gift income from end-of-life gifts from donors. And then there's the jar in the middle. That jar represents the average amount of bequests and other gifts at death that the average nonprofit receives. That's an 8% figure. And then, of course, there's the jar on the far left, and that's what everybody else is getting, something far less. And that includes gifts to religion. And when 30% or more of all charitable dollars given in this country are given to religious causes, it does give you pause as to why the bequest jar is barely filled. So ministry leaders ask me all the time, why don't we get more of these gifts? And in fact, this image kind of reminds me of the way that the question too often gets asked. And I've heard, why did the college across town get Mabel's big gift? She didn't even attend there. And I've heard, why did the Humane Society get Henry's big gift? He didn't even like the animals that were in his yard. So people wonder why don't we get more of these gifts? And just the way the question gets asked sometimes comes off as some sense of entitlement, that somehow as ministry organizations, if we preach and teach giving and tithing, those gifts that we hear about should be ours. So we wonder why we don't get them. Well, there are two pretty easy answers, and I'm quite sure you can already guess what they are. We don't get more of these gifts because we don't ask for them. And we don't get them because our donors don't know about them. But we do ask, you say. In fact, people complain that we ask for money too often. And they do know, you say. We do a stewardship education effort every year, or our website spells out all the different options. But let's remind ourselves about something else we learned last week. Yes, the church has long asked for tithes and offerings, and when we good Christians are in a house of worship, or reminded every time the plate comes by, aren't we? And yes, people of faith have long responded by giving a percentage of their income. They're giving their offerings and making their annual fund gifts out of their income. But remember, in the last session, we introduced the small bucket and the large bucket, and learned that a typical American holds only 10% of their wealth in cash from their income, and 90% of their wealth is held in accumulated assets. We've been teaching the typical person in the pew to think about the small bucket, and we've been asking them to give their 10% from the small bucket, and we haven't been asking from the big bucket. We haven't helped donors know that the big bucket even exists or is even an option. And again, session number 3 will take us deep into the work of inviting these gifts, but the question for the next period of time is, how will we help our loyal donors become legacy giving learners? Helping them become legacy giving learners is a significant part of getting them to the point of being givers. So we're gonna look again, as we did last time, at 2 steps, each with 3 parts. And the first step is leader education, and that's really about you and those who will lead with you. And how will you and others get what you need in order to do this work? That's a question we're going to answer. And then step number 2 is about your donors. We'll spend much of our time together tonight getting into some of the nitty-gritty of what really works when it comes to helping our donors know about legacy giving. So let's start with step number 1, leader education. I like Stephen Covey's approach, beginning with the end in mind. And since this is your end, if you will, that we're talking about, I'll ask you where you want to be 1 or 2 years from now in your legacy giving learning. Where do you want to be 1 or 2 years from now in your legacy giving learning? And somehow I doubt this has been one of the burning questions in your mind, unless you've been in and out of momentum on this for many years. But there's no time like the present to ask it. Where do you want to be 1 or 2 years from now in your legacy giving learning? And go ahead and answer that in the chat role, and I'll share some of your responses. I'll give you a minute to think about it and share something else in the meantime that I'd like you to understand. I often see organizations struggle, or leaders, excuse me, legacy giving learners struggle with these same kinds of things over the years. I often see organizations receive a bequest or two, and they decide, hey, now is the great time to start our endowment. And so they might work with some type of financial advisor to start a fund. And everybody's excited, and then they ask themselves, well, now what? We have a fund. And they struggle to find the resources to even know what's next. And then there's usually somebody in the organization who knows about marketing and communications. So maybe they develop a brochure that's borrowed some good content from another ministry that's much like theirs. And that beautiful brochure sits in a rack somewhere. Maybe you have a brochure like that sits in a rack. Or maybe these leaders have wisely invited somebody from a church body foundation or from a community foundation to come out and share some plan giving best practices with you, and people are inspired for at least a little while to take some new actions. And then I also see organizations struggle with turnover. Maybe it's the leading committee members whose terms expire, or maybe it's a new executive director or a new lead pastor. And it feels like all the knowledge and the momentum is lost, and you're back at square one. So I've seen these challenges many times, and that's why addressing this solution of leadership learning has become such an important thing for me. If we're blessed with leaders who are going to step up and take on this important work, they want to be competent, confident, and they need to have continuity. Just a moment on each one of these items. So leaders want to have competence. They want to know what to do, why they need to do it, and they want the hows. And is surprised most legacy giving leaders have other jobs. They have other priorities. They might do this legacy giving work as a staff member, and plan giving might only be a small piece of a very big portfolio. Or maybe they do this work as a volunteer on just a few hours a month that they have to share. And so they not only want competence, but they want to acquire it easily. There's no time to figure out all of this on their own. Legacy giving leaders also want to be confident, and that confidence will come from, in part, their increased competence, but it'll also come from seeing some real results. It'll come from experiencing the joy that they find in their own generosity as a part of the process. It'll come from witnessing the impact that their ministry is having on the lives of others. But that competence and confidence also requires some continuity of support. And if you're going to avoid the pitfalls of lost momentum that will lead you back into the great abyss of lost gifts, then there needs to be something in place to continuously sustain the support of your leaders. There's always going to be something more urgent, I'm afraid, than inviting gifts that might not be realized until sometime into the future. That's why that first jar to the left sits with so little in it, because we have to build something into our systems that sustains this important work. I illustrate competence, confidence, and continuity as three interlocking gears, because truly one piece of the legacy giving motor does not work without the others. The legacy education, legacy giving education that you provide for yourself and for others needs to take all three of these gears into consideration. Competence, confidence, and continuity. So I'm seeing a few answers to my question. Educated and practiced, Our Savior's friends say, to be able to talk easily about legacy giving. Absolutely. To have the competence to know what to say, and to have the confidence to be able to speak easily. And again, to have had enough practice, the continuity of the experience. So you kind of touch on all three things, all three parts of the gears there, Danae, when you say educated and practiced to be able to talk easily about legacy giving. Absolutely. That's my hope for you too. So quickly, some of the things that leaders need in terms of ongoing education. The competence and the confidence begins when every legacy giving leader receives an initial leadership orientation. And ideally, not just an initial orientation, but a periodic reorientation. And when I think about the importance of a good legacy giving leadership orientation, I was thinking back to my first and only whitewater rafting excursion when I went with a youth group from my church in Chicago. And a couple of the kids in that group had never been in a watercraft before, which is hard to even imagine when you are from Minnesota. Some of the kids had gone fishing or water skiing. Some of us had paddled before, but on still water, not rapids. And of course, there were some in the boat who thought they knew what they were doing. But none of us had been together in this boat and on this water before. And we all agreed that we would be dead in that water if it weren't for our guide and a very careful orientation and the work that he did to steer us in the right direction through those rapids. And I think equipping your legacy giving leaders can be just like this, because some leaders are going to be brand new, some will be somewhat familiar, and yet there'll be others who believe they know more than maybe they do, although I admire confidence. But if they're all in this together for the first time, they really need an orientation together, and preferably from an experienced guide who will help them navigate that process. I think in my experience, a great leadership orientation for a ministry organization is inspirational and educational, and it really should accomplish, again, three things. You'll often hear me refer to three things, but it should introduce the overall best practices of plan giving and in a faith-based context. It should help the group establish itself organizationally so that you know how you're going to function as a team and also what individual roles people might play. And I think a good orientation also gets the whole group teed up for its next actions and some quick wins, because there's nothing like some quick wins in order to be able to create momentum. So a strong orientation is important. I can be that orientation guide for you. I'd be honored to be that orientation guide for you. Myself or somebody who is one of my associates can meet with you to learn exactly where you're at and where you want to go, and we can personalize that orientation for your legacy giving leaders, and we can present it right on site. If distance is a barrier, we can accomplish the same thing through a live webinar that can be recorded and reused by your group as new members join in the future. And if the cost of something personalized is a barrier, then I'm also going to be having a general leadership orientation available to the subscribers on my website. So, and then the other piece is that it's very possible that your church body foundation or a community foundation might be able to provide this kind of a service for you, particularly if you have some type of an investment fund with one of those groups. There might be a plan giving professional in your network who'd be willing and able to develop something for you in terms of an orientation. But no matter what your approach, an initial leadership orientation and some periodic reorientations are just essential for getting everybody working together and navigating in the right direction. And then the second of the three parts here is all about, again, continuing education. Remember, we want our leaders to have competence and confidence and continuity of support. Now, I will tell you that as an employee of several large organizations, I was so lucky to be a part of a culture that was committed to the importance of investing in the continuing education of their staff. It was a huge gift to me to have several $1,000s a year is what it was required in order to travel to and attend some outstanding conferences where I could hone my plan giving skills and stay on top of the most current tax laws and best practices. And because of that investment, I could be a far more effective and productive servant to my organization and the donors that I served. But these conferences were an investment of, again, several $1,000s. They were worth every penny, but a periodic expense that's out of the league of most ministry organizations I know. And that's why I'm offering these webinars on the basics of legacy giving. It's why I'll be offering a master's or a mastery webinar series next for organizations that are a little further along. And I want you to have the continuing education to do this work well. And I want you to have it at a cost that won't compromise the rest of your ministry. Webinars are one piece of the equation, but so much of the value of a conference, as you all know, is in the networking of the people who attend. I've learned so much from others at these conferences and these meetings because people bring their experiences and their own best practices, and then they also bring their enthusiasm and their commitment to the table. And conferences and seminars actually give you the opportunity to develop some relationships with others who are on this journey with you, and somehow the physical gathering and the fellowship of being with other people of faith makes the work feel a whole lot more like an act of worship, I guess, and it inspires us in a whole new way. So again, sometimes your church body foundation, community foundation, other organizations might offer a more affordable seminar or a conference dedicated to planned giving. I cannot say enough glowing things about the annual educational conference that's provided by the Association of Lutheran Development Executives. That's long been my professional association of choice. But generally speaking, these kinds of events, and particularly those that are focused on faith-based organizations, they're hard to come by. And so one of the things I'm committed to is establishing something I'm just calling a Legacy Giving Leadership Academy. That will be a live experience, and my first one is scheduled for October of 2018 in Minneapolis. You can watch my website for some more information. If you're in another part of the country and you want to offer something similar, I would be delighted to work with you to help you make that kind of a live experience available to leaders in your part of the country. And then finally, let's think about the importance of continuity again and acknowledge that there are so many plan giving educational resources online. Some are free, many are free, some are expensive, very expensive, and others fall in between. Some are really helpful if you're just getting started because they focus on the basics, and others are so complex that only a true expert would be giddy about the resource. But in order for you to make the best use of these resources, you do have to know what you're looking for in the first place. And that's a part of the problem. It's where people get stuck because there's just too much. And so I do spend a great deal of time reading just about every resource I can find. I'm going to continue to add more and more links on my website that connect you to some really good free materials that support legacy giving. And I expect that I'll be providing more and more new material for those who are subscribers as well. So there's, again, great opportunity for having the continuity of the educational experience. So we're going to move from leader education now and move into donor education. And I'm going to share with you one of the most important donor education experiences I ever had. And it's about my parents. They know that I tell their story. I've told it for a long time. And my story about helping my parents in their learning about legacy giving started well over 10 years ago when they were getting ready to retire and starting to do a lot of estate planning, and gathered more information than that they could even digest. And in fact, my dad had a very comfortable handle on all of the things related to estate planning, but for Mom, all of this was a real challenge, and it didn't help them that between myself as a gift planner and daughter number 2, who was a wealth manager, and daughter number 3, who's a stockbroker, that they had more advice than they could possibly want or use. But I remember the lesson that I learned about donor education, and I learned it from my mom because I had, I don't know how many different illustrations I had put together to try to interpret to my parents some of the options that they had for accomplishing their goals, to include their family in their estate plan and ministry in their estate plan. And they knew they wanted to do it. It was just a matter of how. And at the time my parents were making their plan, that was when the estate tax in this country was formidable. And with my parents being farmers and so much of their estate tied up in real estate, that left them with a pretty hefty tax bill during that period of time when we didn't have this new tax law. And the one gift that Mom and Dad could make with some tax advantage was really through their IRA. Mom and Dad saved their money. Their retirement plan was their IRA. And I remember trying to explain this to Mom and Dad and all of the illustrations that I put together. Dad was totally fine with it, but Mom just had a real hard time with it. It was just too much information. Finally, when we had our week together at Lake Bemidji one summer, we got into this conversation, and I just pulled a napkin out and put the illustration on a napkin in the most clear kinds of pie graphs I could find to show her what would happen if their IRA was left to the kids, and what would instead happen to their IRA if they shared it with the ministry organizations that they wanted to benefit. And the point here is not so much about the plan. The point is that many people, most people, need to hear and learn about legacy giving many times before they're ready to make this kind of commitment, because there's so many variables as a part of their planning. And not everybody learns about it the same way. It can feel overwhelming. Simpler is better. And that's one of the points that I want to make specifically here as we're talking about legacy giving basics. Simple is best. The napkin is what put Mom into the yes response. Before that, she hedged. When she saw it on the napkin, she said, "Really? That's what you're talking about? Of course we're going to leave our IRA to ministry. The kids will have other assets. We don't want to put more in Uncle Sam's pocket than we have to." So simple is best. Sometimes the backside of the napkin is best. We're going to spend the rest of our time now tonight looking at donor education. And again, let's begin with the end in mind. I've got these three ideas here: information, inspiration, and invitation. That's how we want our donors to feel informed, inspired, and invited. Legacy givers have to have information. We want to be able to help them understand why they should make a gift, how they can make a gift, what their gift will accomplish, who they can get their help from. They need that information. And we also want our donors to be inspired. They want to see how the stewardship of their assets can also impact the life of faith. They want to see and experience how that gift will accomplish great things through your ministry. And so we want to inspire them toward making these kinds of gifts. And we also need to be clear that we are inviting them. All the information in the world is not as good as the invitation. And so every time we're helping them understand, we also need to make sure that they understand that they can make a gift to my ministry, to your ministry. Again, I kind of illustrate these things in three interlocking gears because of their interdependence. All of the information in the world is not going to necessarily inspire somebody to give. And inspiration is the piece that helps people connect with their faith and why these gifts are a part of Christian stewardship. And the invitation, again, if you're not inviting them to support your work, somebody else is inviting them to support theirs. So there are three pieces to the donor education segment of all of this. The first one is developing a year-round education plan. A plan is so important because it creates the framework for all of the to-dos. And donor education doesn't happen easily. It takes some time and some advanced planning and some coordination. So actually developing a plan that you can use year-round is really useful. In fact, I know and have worked with organizations who basically keep recycling the same plan because, again, people can't hear some of this stuff enough. So one of the tools that's in the toolkit is a year-round plan, and depending on where you're sitting in relationship to your screen, you may or may not be able to see some of the details here, but I just want to point out with this sample education plan that it really does come down to a couple of things. It comes down to using some of the existing channels, communication channels that you have in order to be able to tell some stories and present some articles, some how-to kinds of articles. And it comes down to being able to integrate some education events into the plan as well. So this particular sample plan, excuse me, I jumped ahead, goes through a full year. It includes the importance of being able to annually review your website, but it also identifies some how-to articles that can get published throughout the year. And in fact, I've even suggested that they be timed according to the different seasons of the year where donors are more likely to think about certain kinds of gifts. Especially here in Minnesota, as people get older and think about all of the work that's involved with the second home, if they have one, which is often at a lake, sometimes planting the seed about that piece of real estate as a potential gift is what gets mom and dad talking about what they're going to do with that cabin because the kids don't want it anymore, or it's too much fuss for them. It's getting to be too much work for mom and dad. Wouldn't it make an incredible gift? We want to plant that seed while they're trying to keep the lake a lawn mode, or while they're worrying about that second property in Arizona and have no idea what's happening when it's 110. And then looking down the list, going back to the IRA example, boy, it's really important to be talking about the potential for a gift of a qualified retirement plan once we get right into the fall, because that's when people will start making plans for taking their required minimum distributions. I like to mix the how-to articles with donor stories. And if this is just too much, excuse me, for an organization to be doing these kinds of educational stories every month, then there's a way of doing it every other month. But one of the reasons I suggest doing it this frequently is because, again, it needs to be in front of people as a continuous reminder. And remember, these are the articles that I'm going to have in the toolkit that you basically just use. You don't have to invent them or reinvent them. You might want to personalize them a little bit, but for the most part, some of these resources will be ready-made. And so if they're there, use them. Put the plan together and use them. So this will be available on the website, and there'll be a couple of other sample year-round education plans as well. So as we talk about the importance of education and donor education, the second piece I want to recommend, in addition to having the plan then, is including this educational content on your website and in some of your other communications. And I'm just throwing up a couple of examples here so you can see that most often people address this opportunity to educate people by talking about donors, real life donor stories, and also by introducing different gift options. And again, that's woven into the plan that I just presented to you. And let me unpack it just a little bit. Again, I'm using my parent story because now I've shared it with you, and this kind of shows you the end result. This is an article that was done in Luther Seminary's magazine that told mom and dad's story. It's online as well. In fact, there's a whole bunch of donor stories at that particular site that are really good examples. And a really powerful donor story does a couple of things. First of all, it helps the reader connect with people as a peer. And it also helps the reader get introduced to why those donors cared about the mission and ministry of that organization. A really good donor story also introduces a new way of giving. So again, a donor can make the connection. We'll talk more about donor stories when we get into communication, but what you're doing here is you're teaching, educating people about a plan giving tool, but you're doing it kind of subliminally, more within the context of human interest. And then perhaps more mundane, but also important, is just having references on your website and in other places about all of the different ways that you can give. So integrating those basic kinds of how-tos is also an important piece of this. And then third, and this is where I'd like to spend the rest of the time, is talking about presenting a legacy giving seminar. Now, there are a lot of different schools of thought about how valuable seminars are for donors. Donors get invited to, people, I should say in general, get invited to all kinds of estate planning related types of education by local attorneys and financial advisors. You can go to these kinds of events frequently if you were to accept every invitation that comes your way. But what's different about this, again, is the connection to your ministry, the connection more directly to Christian stewardship. And so don't assume that people are going to these educational seminars, coming away from them thinking, I really ought to support my congregation, or I really ought to support that global ministry. They're coming away from those kinds of seminars thinking more than anything about how to benefit themselves and their family. And in my experience, those seminars don't go into charitable giving. And so if they're going to get the charitable giving hint, the charitable giving invitation, you need to be the one that extends it to them. So I'm going to share with you Brenda Moore's top 10 list for producing a great seminar. And we're going to start with number 10. And I'm going to just go through these ideas kind of quickly. Let's start with 10, planning at least 4 months ahead. And in fact, in some organizations, you're going to need a year's lead time even to get it in the right place on your calendar. Some people ask if there's a best time of year for this kind of an event. That's totally dependent on your situation. Here in Minnesota, we get our best attendance in the fall when people are back from their summer vacations, or in the spring when the snowbirds have come back from their winter getaways. I suppose if you're in Florida or Arizona, the best time to do a legacy giving seminar is when all of the Northerners are there with you. But you need at least 4 months of lead time, preferably more. Number 9, use the education event checklist. I'll introduce that to you in a minute. It's one of the downloadable items. I will say do not skip any of the steps. Each task leads to the best possible attendance, the best possible experience, the best possible outcomes. You can certainly add steps that make sense for your organization, but I would say don't sidestep any of the things on that list. I wanted it to be just crystal clear what you need to do in order to pull one of these off. Number 8, keep your expectations realistic. Don't expect 100 people. Don't expect 50 people. A seminar with 20 really great prospects is a win. I keep telling people that is not a fail, that's a win. And anything more than 20 or so is a huge win. But you need to keep your expectations realistic, because not everybody is going to self-select into this kind of an event. Number 7, tight timing, simple logistics. Keep that event, I'd say the seminar itself, including the questions, 60 minutes tops. But also make sure you have about 30 minutes or so for conversation, dessert, appetizers, whatever it is that's going to keep people there and talking and asking questions. But there is no need for anything elaborate, particularly with ministry organizations. Most people, I think, perceive that as being excessive. And so keep it tight. In fact, one of the downloadable resources will be a recommended agenda for how the evening or the day, how the seminar moves. Number 6, have a very deliberate but a very practical promotion plan. You can integrate your promotion tasks right into the year-round communications calendar that we'll address in a couple more sessions. But don't bother reinventing the wheel on seminar promotions materials. Again, there will be samples and templates that you can use from the downloads on my site. Practical promotion planning. Number 5, select a relevant seminar subject. And when you're thinking about the seminar subject, I think there are 3 things. First of all, it should be something focused on an estate planning or an asset stewardship theme. If it's off that theme, it's really hard to connect the dots. 2, it should be something that matters to your constituency or your prospective attendees. You have to think about your audience. And so if your audience is primarily people who are in the senior stage of life, you're probably going to have one kind of conversation. If your audience is a group of young parents, you're probably going to talk about guardianship and about getting your first will. 3, the subject should be about something that allows for the inclusion of gift planning ideas and illustrations. You really need to be able to integrate that into the seminar. Number 4, invite your best prospects. You need to be able to identify, obviously you want to invite everybody. Most organizations want to make this an open kind of invitation. Some maybe not, but clearly you need to do something more focused and more intentional around your best prospects. And again, when we start getting into the next sessions, we'll help you identify who those best prospects might be. Number 3, secure the most credible and effective and inspirational presenter on your subject that you can possibly find and afford. There are local professional advisors or maybe nonprofit gift planners in your area that might offer a seminar. Your church denomination or community foundation might have presenters available. I know that I enjoy doing these seminars very much and do it frequently and can do them on any number of subjects. And so make sure that you bring in that credible presenter. Number two, tell your ministry's story. Start the seminar by communicating your ministry's faith-focused purpose for offering this event, and conclude the seminar with a brief introduction to your legacy giving program and its priorities. And be sure to extend the invitation publicly to the people who attend to support your ministry. And then number one, frame it in faith. Again, go back to the why that we even have this conversation anyway. Frame the seminar with them in the context of whatever your ministry does to form faith, to pass faith on to the next generation, to support your global work, whatever it is, frame it all in faith. A couple of final things, and I would say to you, as you have questions now, go ahead and start putting them in the chat role, because then I'll be teed up even better to get right to them. We're almost at the end. Here's that education event planning checklist that you'll be able to download. And this is a very non-threatening checklist. I remember when I first started using a checklist, it was a whole document that somebody had provided for me that was about 10 pages long. And I found a way to reduce it to 1 page. So again, we keep it simple. And then another thing that you can download is a whole list of ideas for different educational topics. Some of these topics can even be addressed if you're a congregation, you might be able to address them in successive Sundays through your adult forum, or maybe at 3 different times of the year. I've done some other really fun seminars on one I call Chocolate Covered Church, and the subtitle is Recipes for Faith-Inspired Giving. I've done that with a number of women's groups. So I'll provide you with, again, a bunch of topic kinds of ideas. But most typically, kind of the basic seminar really gets into some fundamentals about wills and estate planning and gift planning. I just threw in a few slides here of some of the basic topics that we get to cover in a simple estate planning, a simple wills seminar. Do you need a will? Do you need a trust? What kind of assets can I gift? Again, when you go online, you'll be able to pull down a sample seminar invitation letter. Obviously, this kind of thing needs to be personalized based on your seminar and your audience. I provide a script that you can use to follow up on your invitations to folks for this seminar, and any number of other tools that help you prepare for each of the details involved, again, with pulling off something like this kind of an educational event. And I want to go back to this slide and reinforce, again, the importance of donors having information on a regular basis, not just a very episodic kind of seminar, but for them to have that seminar experience, but to have sustained information throughout all of your various communication channels year-round. For them to have inspiration and inspirational sources and stories that help them think about their own gift, and for them to always feel like they're invited. We'll talk when we get into our communications strategies about some ways that people can continuously feel invited. Again, I invite you to go ahead and start putting any questions you might have in the chat roll. Just going to do a last review here of these 2 steps. So we looked at leader education and donor education. We talked about the importance of that initial orientation, about the continuity of learning that can come from webinars and seminars, and then having the best online resources you can have, and as easily as you can have them, for sustaining the education and knowledge that you as leaders need to continue this work. And we looked at donor education, again, having a really good plan that you can just move through the hoops. And then again, some educational content that you can simply replicate. Some of it you can revise for your own use, but having that educational content across all of your channels, whether that's newsletter, web, email, increasingly is what people are using, and then the importance of offering a legacy giving seminar. Then finally, what's next? Here's where I want to challenge you to just take the leap ahead and not wait. I think tomorrow or today is as good a day as any to commit to an orientation for your legacy giving leaders if you haven't done one recently. Next week or even over the weekend would be a great time to review the resources that will be on the website and for you to already begin charting your education plan. And then next month is a great time to actually provide that orientation. Again, striking while the iron is hot. And then certainly next month, come back and take in the next webinar where we're going to be talking about gifts. Again, the place where people often stall and where ministry really flourishes if we do that work right. So we'll end here. Again, I'm looking for any questions that you might have, and I'll hang on for a few minutes to see what those questions might be. Again, I really want to encourage you. Oh, here we go. Okay. Danae asks, I shared a few templates and guides that I'll have on my website. What other resources will we see? Well, for right now, you'll see other education-related resources. I'm basically putting onto my website the resources that we have as we're introducing the different ideas. So in terms of education-related resources for right now, you'll see the checklist, some sample invitations, some sample ideas around the themes for various seminars, a script for making sure that you can engage the attendees and secure their attendance and try to build the attendance with the best possible folks. You're also going to see some more donor stories, some actual articles that you can replicate and actually use in your newsletters. So I'll have some articles there about how to make gifts of real estate, how to make gifts of your IRA. I'll be providing a bunch of what is kind of it's education material, but it'll also intersect with the communication step. Those pieces I think are particularly useful because already you might find one that you would want to get teed up in your newsletter almost right away. So there'll be plenty of that, and I'll keep adding to those as new stories develop. I'm going to be publishing something tomorrow that will be there that will talk about the new tax law and why ministries shouldn't be afraid of it, why they should embrace it, and what it means hopefully for improved giving. So there'll be quite a bit more that gets onto the website now this time because there's just that much more in the education realm to share with you. So, so hopefully you'll have time to kind of browse and take that all in. Anybody else have any other questions? Know that you can be in touch with me outside of this presentation. I'll have, I'm going to need to re-record this. I think in my error for sharing from the beginning, this is going to need to be re-recorded, and I hope that I will be able to get to that right away tomorrow morning, and we'll be able to get this out there for you. So I will send you all an email as soon as I have the recording redone. And have those resources there for you so you can pull it down. So watch for that from me. Thank you so much for your patience with me as I learn how to try to pack all of this knowledge and experience into a short period of time and try to learn how to use new technology that will hopefully help get the word out. And I just really want to thank you for being patient despite all of the glitches. If there are even 3 things tonight that help you think differently about how you might be able to either get your own educational experiences that support you in your own learning, or how you can begin to get donors into a learning mode around this subject, then I think you will be light years ahead of where you were before. So don't wait, jump in, and we'll be in touch. Blessings. We'll see you next month. Thanks.